Have you ever looked at a modern map and felt like the world was a bit too explored, too predictable? Today, we have satellites that can zoom in on your backyard and GPS that tells us exactly where every coastline ends. But imagine a time when the map was a doorway into the impossible. Imagine unfolding a massive 10-foot wide map from the year 1587 and seeing not just countries and oceans, but massive fire, breathing dragons soaring over South America, centaurs roaming the plains of Africa, and giant cyclops standing guard over unknown islands. This isn't a scene from a fantasy novel. This is the actual testimony of Urbano Monte, a man who created one of the largest and most mysterious maps in human history. Why would a serious scholar, a man of high society and deep learning, populate our world with monsters? Was he simply imaginative, or was he recording a reality that has since been erased from our history books? Today we are diving deep into the 16th and 17th century mind of Urbano Monte. We are going to explore his massive Planisphere, look at the specific locations where he claimed these mythical beasts lived, and ask the question, what did he know that we've forgotten? To understand the monsters, we first have to understand the man and his masterpiece. Urbano Monte was an Italian cartographer from Milan. He wasn't just a guy drawing in his basement. He was wealthy, well-connected, and had access to the greatest libraries of his time. In 1587, he finished a project that was truly ahead of its time. He created a map made of 60 individual sheets that, when put together, form a circular projection of the Earth. If you were to stand in the middle of it, you would see the world spreading out from the North Pole, a perspective that looks eerily like the logo of the United Nations today. But as you lean in closer to this 430-year-old map, the geography starts to get weird. While the shapes of Italy or Africa look somewhat familiar, the inhabitants are anything but. Monte didn't just draw borders, he drew a testimony of what he believed occupied those lands. And this is where our journey into the world of monsters begins. Let's start with the dragons. Today, we think of dragons as the ultimate symbol of fiction. But for Monte and his contemporaries, the dragon was a biological reality. On his map, specifically in the regions of South America and parts of Asia, Monte depicts massive, winged serpents. These aren't just decorative flourishes in the corners of the page. They are placed with intent. In the 17th century, the natural history of the world was still being written. Explorers returning from the New World brought back stories of massive iguanas, giant snakes, and monitor lizards. To a European who had never seen a Komodo dragon, the line between a large lizard and a mythical dragon was incredibly thin. But Monte goes further. He describes these creatures as having a presence that dominates the landscape. In the dense, unexplored forests of what he calls the southern lands, the dragon is king. Why would he put them there? At the time, there was a prevailing theory that the further you got from the civilized center of the world, the more nature became distorted and giant. The heat of the tropics was thought to cook the earth in a way that produced monsters. If a snake could grow to 10 feet, why couldn't it grow to 50? If a bird could have a massive wingspan, why couldn't a lizard develop wings? Then, we move to the centaurs. We usually associate centaurs with ancient Greek mythology, half-man, half-horse creatures roaming the hills of Thessaly. But on Urbano Monte's map, the centaur is located in the heart of Africa. This is a fascinating choice. By the 1500s and 1600s, Africa was a land of profound mystery to Europeans. They knew the coastlines, but the interior was a blank space filled with rumors. Monte's testimony suggests a belief in hybridization. During this era, many people believed that in the vast, hot deserts and jungles of Africa, different species would gather at watering holes and, due to the extreme heat and lack of other mates, would cross-breed. This was a scientific explanation used at the time to justify the existence of monsters. To Monte, a centaur wasn't necessarily a magical being. It was a biological freak of nature, a remnant of an older world where the boundaries between human and animal were much more fluid. When he drew a centaur on his map, he was telling the viewer, in the center of this continent, the laws of nature as you know them do not apply. And then there are the cyclopes. This is perhaps the most haunting part of Monte's testimony. On several islands scattered throughout the distant oceans, Monte depicts giants with a single eye in the middle of their foreheads. Now, why would a cartographer put a cyclops on a map intended for navigation and study? To understand this, we have to look at the testimony of the ancients. In the 17th century, history was seen as a process of decline. The further back you went, the greater and more powerful humans were. The Greeks wrote about the Cyclops, and for Monte, those weren't just stories, they were historical records. If Homer said they existed, and if sailors returned with tales of finding massive skulls with a single hole in the forehead, then the Cyclops was a real threat. Monte's map serves as a warning. He places these beings on islands that were off the beaten path. He is essentially telling the explorers of his day that the world is still inhabited by the Old Ones. He believed that while Europe had been tamed by religion and modern society, the fringes of the world were still stuck in the age of myths. This brings us to a very important realization about Urbano Monte's work. He wasn't just guessing. He was aggregating. He took the writings of Marco Polo, the journals of Christopher Columbus, the myths of the Greeks, and the latest reports from Portuguese sailors, and he smashed them all together into one visual reality. In his mind, he wasn't making a map of a fantasy world. He was making the most accurate map of the real world. Think about how terrifying that world must have been. You set sail from a port in Spain or Italy, and you have a copy of a map like Monte's. You aren't just worried about storms or scurvy. You are legitimately looking at the horizon, wondering if a dragon is going to descend from the clouds, or if you'll wash up on an island inhabited by man-eating giants. The map was a psychological landscape as much as it was a geographical one, but there is a deeper layer to Monte's monsters. In the 17th century, there was a concept called the Great Chain of Being. This was the idea that everything in the universe had a specific place, from the smallest pebble to God himself. Monsters like the ones Monte drew represented the gaps in that chain. They were the between things. A centaur is between a man and a beast. A dragon is between a bird and a reptile. By placing them on the map, Monte was trying to complete the chain. He was trying to show that the world was full, that there were no empty spaces, and that every possible creature God could imagine actually existed somewhere on the earth. As we look at the first few sheets of his 60-page masterpiece, we see a world that is vibrating with life. Every corner of the ocean is filled with massive sea serpents and whales that look like armored islands. The land is teeming with unicorns, griffins, and strange humanoids with their faces in their chests. But why did these things disappear from maps just 100 years later? Why does a map from 1680 look so much saner than Monte's map from 1587? The answer lies in the shift from the Age of Wonder to the Age of Enlightenment. But before we get to the disappearance of these monsters, we have to look closer at the specific testimony Monte provides for each one. He didn't just draw them. He wrote notes. He left clues. He believed he was leaving a legacy of truth for future generations. In the next section, we're going to look at the lost continent of the South, a place Monte calls Terra Australis, and the incredible, bizarre creatures he claims live there. We will see how Monte's map might actually be a hidden record of a world that existed before a great cataclysm, or perhaps a world that exists right under our noses, hidden by the way we choose to look at geography today. As we move our gaze toward the bottom of Monte's massive planisphere, we encounter one of the most controversial and mysterious features of ancient cartography, the Great Southern Continent, or Terra Australis Incognita. In the 16th and 17th centuries, geographers didn't just think there might be land at the bottom of the world. They were convinced of it. They believed the Earth needed a massive landmass in the south to balance the weight of the continents in the north. If that land didn't exist, they feared the world would literally tip over. On Monte's map, this southern continent is not a frozen wasteland of ice like our modern Antarctica. Instead, it is a lush, sprawling world filled with forests, rivers, and, most importantly, the strange testimony of life that defies everything we know about biology. This is where Monte places some of his most bizarre creatures. He depicts large, flightless birds that look like a cross between an ostrich and a prehistoric terror bird. He draws strange, bipedal creatures that look human from a distance, but possess claws and scales. Why did Monte believe the South was so full of life? At the time, the southern lands were a blank canvas for the human imagination, but they were also a repository for lost things. There was a prevailing idea that as the old world of Europe and Asia became more crowded and civilized, the ancient, monstrous creatures of the past retreated to the furthest reaches of the globe. To Monte, Terra Australis wasn't just another continent. It was a sanctuary for the remnants of a primordial Earth. Let's look at the specific annotations Monte left in these regions. Unlike many other mapmakers who simply decorated empty spaces to hide their ignorance, Monte often included small blocks of text or specific icons that reference contemporary reports. He mentions the vastness of the giants in the southern regions of the Americas, near what we now call Patagonia. This wasn't just a myth to him. When Ferdinand Magellan sailed through those waters decades earlier, his crew reported seeing people so tall that the Europeans only reached their waists. Monte takes these reports and treats them as scientific fact. On his map, the giants of the South are depicted as a distinct race of humanity. He shows them living in organized groups, wearing animal skins, and hunting creatures that look like giant guanacos. By including them, Monte is testifying to a world that is much more diverse and much more dangerous than the one we live in today. He is telling us that humanity isn't just one thing. It is a spectrum that includes giants, pygmies, and perhaps even the cyclopes we discussed earlier. Now let's pivot to the oceans. If the land was full of monsters, the sea was an absolute nightmare. In the 17th century, the ocean was the ultimate mystery. It was the beasts. Monte's map shows the oceans populated with sea serpents so large they are seen coiling around entire ships. He draws whales with terrifying jagged teeth and blowholes that look like volcanic vents. But here is the fascinating part. Monte's sea monsters are often based on real sightings that were misinterpreted through the lens of the time. When a sailor saw a giant squid or a massive oarfish for the first time, they didn't have a biological category for it. They went back to their maps and their legends. To Monte, these weren't monsters in the sense of being supernatural. They were simply monstrous fish. He believed the ocean was so deep and so old that it could hide creatures of infinite size. His testimony warns that the water is not a highway for trade, but a territory belonging to ancient Leviathans. One of the most striking images on the map is located near the coast of Africa, a giant bird carrying an elephant in its talons. This is the Roc, a legendary creature from Middle Eastern folklore, famously mentioned in the tales of Sinbad and the writings of Marco Polo. Why would a sophisticated Italian cartographer include a bird that can carry an elephant? Again, we have to look at the testimony of the ancients. Marco Polo was considered a primary geographical source in the 1600s. If Polo said he saw feathers that were dozens of feet long in Madagascar, Monte felt he had a duty to record it. For Monte, the world was a place of magnificence. He believed that God's creation was so vast that it must include creatures of incredible scale. The Roc wasn't a fairy tale, it was an example of the grandeur of nature. By placing it on the map, he was mapping the limits of biological possibility. But what about the people? Monte's map doesn't just show monsters, it shows monstrous races of men. In the 17th century, there was a widespread belief in the Blemies, men with no heads and faces located in their chests, and the Cyapods, people with a single, giant foot that they used as an umbrella to shade themselves from the sun. Modern history tells us these were just racist or ignorant caricatures of distant other people. But if we look at Monte's map through a different lens, we see something else. We see a man trying to document the deformities of the world. In the 1600s, it was believed that the environment, the heat, the soil, the stars overhead, directly shaped the physical body. If you lived in a place where the sun was too hot or the air too thin, your body would adapt in ways that seemed monstrous to a European. Monte wasn't just drawing freaks, he was mapping what he thought were the environmental effects of a diverse and wild planet. This leads us to a fascinating question. How did Monte organize all this information? Remember, this map is 10 feet wide. It's a circular planisphere. When you look at it from the North Pole down, you realize that Monte has created a hierarchy. The further you move away from the center, the more monstrous the world becomes. This tells us a lot about the 17th century worldview. They believed that order and normalcy radiated from a central point. The fringes of the map were where the rules of reality began to fray at the edges. The dragons, the centaurs, and the cyclopes were the border guards of the unknown. They existed at the limits of human exploration. But there is a twist in Monte's testimony. Unlike other maps of the era that used monsters to signify, "Here be dragons," Monte's map is incredibly detailed in those monstrous areas. He provides names of rivers, mountains, and provinces in the middle of these monster-filled lands. This suggests that he believed these areas were inhabitable and even profitable. He wasn't saying, "Stay away." He was saying, "Be prepared." He was providing a survival guide for a world that was far more inhabited than we dare to believe today. Think about the implications of this. If we take Monte at his word, the 17th century was a time when humanity shared the planet with multiple sentient species and massive biological anomalies. It was a Middle-earth reality that was slowly being erased by the spread of modern gunpowder, global trade, and scientific categorization. As we move into the next 1,000 words, we are going to look at the Japanese embassy to Europe in the 1580s and how their visit to Italy might have influenced Monte's depictions of the East. We will also look at the celestial aspect of the map, how Monte believed the stars and the movement of the planets actually created these monsters on the ground. We will explore the idea that for Monte, The map wasn't just a drawing of the land, but a mirror of the heavens. One of the most incredible things about Urbano Monte's map is that it wasn't created in a vacuum of old books and dusty legends. In 1585, just a few years before Monte finished his masterpiece, something historic happened in Milan. A group of 4 young Japanese aristocrats, known as the Tench Embassy, arrived in Italy. They were the first Japanese envoys to reach Europe,